Good morning, everyone. We're going to start in a few minutes. We're still waiting for someone here to join us. So please wait a few minutes and we'll be starting. Thanks.
Now it's working? Yeah, okay, it's working. Damn it. All together? Okay.
Yes. We are all together, and I would like to welcome our dear friends and wonderful guests because
we have everybody who is supporting here in Warsaw, our wonderful residents who are coming from different destinations. So I would like to welcome especially Martin and Thomas, and Matthias can join us, but he's with us with his heart, and also representatives of American embassies. So it's wonderful that we have you here. I would like to welcome also our dear residents, Fleur and Nadia and me, who will be today sharing with us all the stories about their projects and plans for this residency. I would like to thank you, curators who are going to work with them over this 3 months long and half a year long residencies for Emi. Sorry. Not for Emi, but for Nadia, Julia Herasimowicz and Marianna Dobkowska, and my team who organized it, and colleagues from IT. So we are letting you start, Fleur, and go ahead.
Thank you. Is it okay if I stand up? I think it's easier. Okay. So, just put this over here. So, hi, my name is Fleur Roggeman, and I'm from Belgium. And I'm gonna start with a small video to show you guys. So, hi. Last year, during my master's degree, I created this interactive and immersive installation. The entire concept started 1.5 years ago when I was traveling by myself for 3 weeks in Indonesia. Over here, I took a lot of beautiful pictures of the ocean and because I've never seen such a clear blue water before. So I had a bunch of all these, let me show you, this beautiful water. And when I got back home in Belgium, I saw on the news that apparently a few kilometers away, this was happening. Oh, the color isn't that bright. Okay. The entire environment was deeply red. It was so scary to see and realize, and I felt so stupid and almost embarrassed that I've only had these beautiful pictures of the ocean, and also that I traveled only for 3 weeks to the other side of the world just for a holiday in a way. So I was really struggling with this feeling. So I wanted to create a piece out of it. And that's how the installation starts to evolve. I started with an interactive projection. Let me go back to this. So when there is no sound around in the room, the entire installation is filled with this beautiful blue color that's inspired by the pictures and the photos I took. But when there is sound around near the installation, a red big bubble appears. So that's a reason or small link to the environment that I also realized over there. And it's because I want to narrow the action and reaction we people have on our environment. I think it's important because I didn't realize, and I think not a lot of people realize how bad our habits are and what consequences it has. So I narrowed it down to create an action visible that normally you don't see because it's sound, you don't see sound. And so this was the start of the entire concept. I also poured it into this static wave. So the wave swallows you in a way, so we get surrounded by the sea. I'm also very interested in scenography and set designing. I also have a background in sculpting and installation art in my bachelor's. And but I think it's important that we also think about why we make so many stuff and so many objects and art in a way, but it's only to fill these white cubes. Why do we only a few people see this? We already have enough objects, so we have to think it through when we create something to give it multiple purposes. So I also organized a festival. So this piece can also be turned into a DJ booth, into a bar. I even got a question from a couple who wants to get married underneath as a form of a nice backdrop, chapel kind of thing. You can also hear, is it without a projection? So the idea of creating a set or a scenography piece, but it can also stand into a white cube, it was this missing piece that finally got together in a way. So I want to continue working and creating installation with multiple purposes, and also in creating festivals or other events where we can combine our arts and minds and creative thoughts. So we have an ability to do this and also create stuff we're not fully in control of. As you saw in the first video I showed you, I was collaborating with a beautiful dancer and a really artistic and interesting composer. And this opens also opportunities. We have to combine our thoughts, we have to work together, because especially in this individualistic world, I think it's very important. And that's also why when I created this festival, normally it was last year, but it got postponed to this year. Then I wanted to create tickets at a low price, so everybody can involve and everybody can attend to it, and also to get out these museum white cube basic structures we're used to have. And also, last year I started creating interactive projections. I just started with it, but it's very interesting to me because it opens also a lot of opportunities to collaborate as well. So I'm still working with dancers and composers and other artists. So I'm really grateful and thankful that I got the opportunity to do this, because it's not for granted in a way. And I'm really also happy to be here. And thank you, guys. I don't know if there are questions left. Yeah, hi.
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll introduce myself first. Yeah. I'm Martin, and I'm from the Embassy of the Netherlands. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Hey, and of course, I'm very curious, what is your plan that you are going to do here now in Warsaw?
I'm still working on other projections as well, because it is an easy way to get out of the matter part, to not create another object as well. But I also want to see if it's able to create an event as well, maybe in collaboration with my 2 other residents, and also to get out there as well, just in Warsaw. And also I want to maybe create abstract installation as well. I would love that, but it's pretty hard because I don't really, because of the measurements right now, I still have to figure this out. But I would love to do it if it's possible.
And how long are you going to stay here with us?
Till the end of April.
Okay.
Could I follow up with a question?
Yeah.
My name's Dan Hastings. I'm from the U.S. My question is simple, and I'm going to ask probably all artists, but what drew you to Poland? What drew you to Warsaw?
Last year, I was able to have a little workshop. It was from school out, but I was the only one who attended. And it was to learn these interactive projections as well, and coding. And I really loved the city, but I wasn't really able to see the entire city as well. And I'm also still in contact with the people who taught me this project and program. And I'm also still in contact, and she wants to teach me a little bit more out of it, because I didn't get all of it, and we really bonded also very well. And it's a beautiful city.
Sure. Thank you.
Are there any questions left?
Hello, my name is Paula. I'm from the General Representation of the Government of Flanders, Belgian Embassy, and I would like to ask where your festival took place in Flanders.
I live in Lommel. It's in Limburg. It's on the right from Antwerp. And normally it was over there, because I also got a subsidy. How do you use subsidy? Yeah, over there, and they really helped me out because they really motivate me. But it didn't take place last year because it got postponed. But they're still also looking forward to, and they helped me with a lot of stuff as well. So it's over there. But I don't want to be too much attached to one place. For me, this was the most easy way, and also because it's the first one, first edition. So that's why it's over there. But I wanted to, yeah, just this platform I wanted to create. All right. Thank you.
just mention that Fleur's residency is supported by the Flanders Ministry of Arts as one of the residencies every year that we host since a couple of good years, I think 7 at least. So, yeah. And now, Nadia. And Nadia is coming in frames of our exchange with Pro-Helvetia for the longest residency, for half a year.
So I will just put a timer, so I'm sure that it won't take too long. Right. And control. Okay. So hello everyone. I'm really grateful to be here. I'm going to stay here for the next 6 months. Maybe maybe that's better like that. Yeah, I really would like to thank again the residency team and Julia for the invitation. I'm really happy to have the chance to spend such a big amount of time on just researching and being in a very nice context. So thanks. So I'm Nadia Elamly. I'm based between Lausanne and Geneva in Switzerland. I'm beside the practice I'm going to show you for the next minutes. I also have a curatorial practice in independent art spaces, and also in a project of an online platform dedicated to research, to text in written by researchers who are cultural workers, artists, always engaged, and also militant and activists. So, and also maybe I have to mention that I also work as a social worker in community centers and in urban spaces in Switzerland. And that leads me to the practice I'm going to talk about today. So, in my previous works, I would say that it was mainly focused on those questions. How does one understand him, her, themselves in urban, read as public and ergo collective and civic spaces? How does one understand his, her, or their ability to act within such contexts? And how does one interact with the boundaries of and passage between public and private spheres? And so to contextualize a bit the research I'll continue to work on here, I was concerned and impacted by a huge redevelopment, urban redevelopment project in my hometown 4 years ago, and which consisted of like the classic scenario of the destruction of a whole, a huge neighborhood that was kind of precarious, and its replacement by like offices, shops, and luxury inhabitation complexes. And being an inhabitant may be available to witness, to notice who disappeared from those spaces, which bodies had like to be relocated, or also, thank you. Sorry, it's a bit emotional for me to talk about this part. Also, people who disappeared because of neglect, like politics of neglect, like when you neglect biopolitics of precaritization and so on. So some people didn't cope with this situation. I would say merely elderly, how do you say, fragile people. And yes, so I was able to witness the destruction of those social ecosystems of mutual cares, and or at least mutual attention, which in French we could also say faire attention, which I will come back later, but this practice of making and cultivating attention for one another. And yeah, so from a structural perspective, what could be noticed is the dismantlement of spaces for gathering. Here is a picture we can. It's on purpose that we cannot see it perfectly, but we can see some pieces of a huge building that was the only place where it was possible to gather in that town, and so the destruction of common and communal structures for hosting such practices of gathering, and it was replaced by really classic, I think. Also public benches were the first common structures for gathering that disappeared. So it was replaced by those individualistic forms of occupation of the spaces, and the promotion of behavioral models of mobility, flexibility, on purpose of productivity. And also what could be felt was the kind of a fragmentation of space, because suddenly you couldn't access the spaces you were used to go together and to commonly. So those former common spaces, you couldn't access them anymore because of the rise of fences and So actually, during my first week in Warsaw, I had the chance to meet this amazing fresque at the entrance of a mall in front of a palace, the Palace for Culture and Science. And I think this is an absolutely great representation of that. I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but really this fragmentation, bodies who are just walking like, productivity, we could say a lot of things about this fresque, and if anyone knows the author, I'd be really happy to meet this person. So the present research I'm gonna work on for the next 6 months was born from this context, and it's an attempt to respond to the following questions, which are how to visibilize those normalized and then quasi-invisible while monumental at the same time, and global processes of structural violence. Processes which tend themselves to erase forms of becoming with others, may it be humans or non-humans, and by that I mean structures. And how to visibilize those processes of violence without reinforcing them, repeating them, and by this contributing to the normalization. And how to reclaim in such environments the possibility to practice arts of noticing, quoting Anna Tsing, practices of faire attention, and through that trying to cultivate an ability to respond or a responsibility, quoting Donna Haraway. The research project called Le Banc is a speciality and an attempt to respond to such questions. It comes from the French sentence which means mettre au banc, which means to banish someone, and to that, by adding a little c, it becomes the word banc, which is bench, referring to public benches. And so, doing this, adding this little c, it's an attempt to put in the name an attempt to reverse those processes of making collective environment inhospitable, and also to gather around this figure that is known by everyone, and to reverse those processes through proposing spaces of hospitality, and where to sit together and observe and notice and discuss and inhabit collectively and think collectively practices of social collective existence, becoming with in generative and transformative ways. I forgot to, yeah. So this figure is thought as a mediating object around which to gather, and it is also read from a feminist speculative perspective, reading this figure such as a tool or a technology that allows to see, but at the same time to be seen. So it's read as a tool to generate visions, and that's also, so this platform and space seeks to generate visions of denaturalized and restructuralized care labor, decolonized practices of rooting and identifying oneself in a given social fabric and civic space, and reconquer practices of assembling in generative perspectives that tends towards processes of xenogenesis, becoming other through the living together and living with the aleatory other of the street. And also, for me, it's a figure that points to what in French we call le banc de montage, which refers to like how do you call that? The editing, the practice of editing as an filmmaker. And it's where I try to position myself in that research. So to use that figure as a subject around which we gather, but also to think about practices of assemblage and and how to bond, like to rebuild those social fabrics and so on. And to finish, so here at the CCA, I'd like to try to take the time, like, to listen, to observe, and to see how those issues echoes locally, and hoping also to encounter initiatives, like to meet people and initiatives of resistance to such issues. But I will mainly work on decolonized approach of documentary, or what I prefer to call a post-documentary practice, and how that seeks to respond to the question how to reappropriate the capacity to appear in public and to develop an agency towards it. And also a part, I think, of being here will be dedicated to the sharing of methodologies and practices of the creations of visions and mythopoietics, or the creation of narratives, like how to resist hegemonic narratives and to try to oppose to them like other ones. Yeah. So that's it. Thank you. I don't know if anyone has any question.
So first of all, for a non-native English speaker, your English is absolutely beautiful and very sophisticated. So I really enjoyed listening to the terms that you're using, and they're very complex ideas that you're trying to communicate through your art. So just a couple of questions. First of all, what drew you to Warsaw and the artist in residency here at the center? And also, you know, I was thinking about the phenomena that you are trying to, I don't know, are you trying to reverse a phenomena or bring them to people's attention? Because I would say this is probably an age-old phenomenon that's been, ever since there have been human beings on the planet, then structural violence, pulling things down and replacing it with something so-called better. So I was wondering, how has that informed you? Or are you mainly focused on our era, the era that we live in? Because I think that you have actually a lot of good points, and it's been hard for me to see around the world as a diplomat, seeing old neighborhoods torn down and these big new commercial developments put in. That yes, they look great with the cafes and things like that, but if you knew that what was there before, and even if they were precarious, they had their own charm. I was raised in the Silicon Valley, and I come from a small town called Los Gatos, famous because Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak invented the first computer, Apple computer in my town. But what's great about my town that I really love, as I've traveled around the world and I realize, is that we have a planning commission. So these are citizens that self-nominate themselves to join this commission, and they advise the town councilors on any new developments. And we actually, in my town, now don't let any chains come into our town. No more McDonald's, no more Burger Kings. If they were there in the 70s, that's fine. But builders do not like building in our town because we have very strict guidelines how tall you can build. If you want to build a property, you have to put up fictional plastic to show what it would look like. And people don't like building there because it becomes more expensive, because builders have to pay more attention to the building codes. So in that way, I think, though, we are preserving the history of the town and the character, and it's not being torn down every 25 years by developers. But I have to say, it's a struggle in capitalism to do what your art is trying to do, but I give you a lot of credit for that. So.
Thank you. So maybe to respond first to the second intervention. So yes, this is only one way through the city, and an urbanistic approach is only one way among others to try to dismantle destructive impacts of the systems we are living in. And yeah, the city here works more as this metaphor, and those urban spaces and center city spaces from which so many people are erased. And it's one situation to try to reappear in civic spaces and to make some voices that are silenced hearable. I don't know, again. And also, I've been really also, how do you say, inspired by, through my work as a community worker in urban spaces, public spaces, to see some initiatives where people were able to basically build themselves or have a direct impact on their environment by taking care of some parts, and it really showed me how actually it's possible to cultivate spaces to relearn, or to learn. Those practices of, sorry, in English, I have to translate from French to English while I'm thinking. What I wanted to say, it's only one space to try to do that, and mainly to try to work on this question of occupation, visibility, silence, and what did I want to say? And of course, so many people are working on questions of gentrification. But what I was less able to find was this approach through a performative occupation of the space. Here I think of Judith Butler and her last book, Notes Towards a Performative Theory of Assembly, where she read the occupation movements, or analyzed the occupation movements of public spaces to fight against politics of precarizations and those biopolitics. So I don't know if that responds. And your first question was about what.
Yeah, why did you come to Warsaw for the artist in residency?
Yeah, so I was invited by Julia, and actually it's also a very precious chance to displace myself from a very Western and a very Western history and background, which were inscribed with Switzerland, and to also listen to what it is to have another historical background with another hegemonic system, and what are the differences then, or how can the critique be? Also, my references are really Western references, and just to share and to complexify the critique also, informed by other perspectives from here. So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
I'm really amazed, and I think it's really, really timely what you're working with, especially that during the pandemics we were seeking for various ways of assembling, and one might think that maybe once we are able to be together, we will be looking for new ways of being together. And something that came to my mind was this, how to turn this consumerist or productivity-driven forms of gathering or being disconnected, and a very wonderful practice that we have observed in Indonesia, which is called nongkrong. And nongkrong is a way of being together in idleness that might become productive, but it's not the main point of being productive. And then there is this amazing example of how people in Indonesia were using shopping malls or the 7-Eleven chains to just be together and do nothing. And it was this amazing way of occupying the space and at the same time not buying anything and just simply not doing anything. So I'm just dreaming of those new ways of occupying the space that maybe might arise from the long time when we have not been together. This is just one comment, but thank you so much. It's going to be exciting to have you here.
So thank you so much, Nadia. It was very interesting. And now Emmy. Emmy. Is connecting in one person or different directions. So she's her background is Polish, and she's based in Netherlands and also the U.S. background. And we are hosting Emmy thanks to Modrian's support towards our program. So yes, thank you, and go ahead.
Do I do this here? Oh, yes. Control. So to start out first, I want to introduce myself. So thank you, and thank you to everybody that's managed to bring this residency also to life. And I am an anomaly. I grew up in a patchwork Polish community in Brooklyn, and I never quite got into the sense of what it means to participate in a civic space within a Polish context, even though I occupied it through most of my childhood. And I ended up in the Netherlands mostly because of my desire to understand how we can cultivate more interdependent relationships with the living world. And through that, a master's degree in arts and society ended up happening, and a lot of fieldwork. So my practice is based in anthropological thinking or inspired by anthropology as a means. So I do a lot of field work. And these are mostly long-standing, situated investigations in various places. And mainly the focus is what is our relationship to the natural world, and how can I start to decolonize these dominant dualisms that recognize a separation, recognize man as separate from its living environments. And I really want to focus on the last year of my work, in which I began a multi-year project called Assembling Ecologies. And in 2020, in spite of a global pandemic, there was still enough time to learn and relate to the common world. In the Netherlands, I was really interested in dominant European cultural hegemonic structures as found in institutions such as botanic gardens. And I spent a lot of time at the Utrecht Oude Gorges, which in fact is not a registered botanic garden. It is part of the Utrecht University Museum, and it represents a botanic garden filled with placeholder plants, cultivating and holding a history of which is honored. And so during my fieldwork, and also amounting to a thesis of a diffractive ethnography situated in intersectional feminist thought, I spent a period of about 9 months visiting the garden, working with the volunteers, improving my Dutch, which at the end of it, some wonder, yes, with a very strong accent, and really building a community within a certain space of invisible maintenance and labor. These volunteers and I ended up sharing lots of coffee and lots of tea, and working together to understand what care looks like and how time and cyclical processes actually cultivate some of the best relationships moving forward. And so my research amounted in not only a master's thesis, but also paintings, interviews, films, and sculptures. So in my practice, I produce to think through all of these experiences, but I'm also struggling with the difficulty of what these objects really do and function in the world afterwards, and what life they might have. So this questioning came through this entire process, and the proposition that came through in considering, well, what does it look like if this botanic garden, which has that potential to be thought of otherwise, could be considered one of nature cultures, could be one of considered not as classification and separation of species, but as one of complete participation. So I essentially am proposing a rethinking towards our dominant cultural narratives of nature. After this fieldwork, I ended up on a Dutch polder, of which is quite an interesting place. This is a part of the Cultureland residency, and it's just north of Amsterdam. And in this area, a polder is essentially, I hope I'm explaining this right, it's essentially old peat bogs that were drained out and the water had sunken down or had compressed it. And many of these are actually used now for agriculture and livestock farming. So with this notion of participation as a critical aspect of our engagement with the living world, I spent a lot of time thinking about this. And so what emerges from a direct material engagement with the living world? Would you like me to go back to this slide? And this polder as well is quite an anomaly in the Dutch polder region, because it's a space dedicated to polyculture, biodiversity, and also learning to live with the world. And during my time here, I thought about kinship, and kinship as a sense of how do I begin to produce some sort of an archive or some sort of a remnants of all of the interactions I was having on a day-to-day basis on this polder. For example, tending to the bees, feeding the chickens, pruning pear trees, walking each day, observing life happening and changing around me, and also documenting all of these changes. And the excess of what was happening was nearly impossible to document. Still, I tried to create an archive. As you can see, it falls a little flat. My archive was a representation of the Western knowledges of which I was conditioned to observe and draw and identify species and try to order and create classification and to figure out, okay, like this is botanical science, like how do I draw this thing? And through that process, it was also an active breaking down of these old models of knowledge and knowing, in effect, to figure out how I can document processes of participating. And that also ended up reaching into different craft practices and much more understanding of how to grow one's food and the labor involved in these aspects. So while both of these really showed, both of these instances of fieldwork and research showed the necessary about participation and my reflection on participation in this first year, I noticed that there was still something really critically missing in it, and that was essentially the exchange between bodies. So there was a lot of human to plant relationship and some human to human relationship building, but the community was much more focused on living processes, processes of living and dying in the now. And so in this archive, there were also paintings and a way of trying to represent. And my concerns with representation, since these two aspects happened, or since these two sites of investigation happened, is becoming less and less dominant. And so what happens is what replaces is this notion of diffraction. After I emerged from a very isolated few months on this polder, I came back to Amsterdam and I began looking at my neighbors and my community, and started out with this Lucy Lippard quote in these conversations, and it says, "Landscape is a concrete three-dimensional shared reality. It's a collaboration between people and nature, rather than an idealized view or picture of what lies beyond our own centers." And Lippard wrote about this in this book called Undermining Landscape, and focused much about actually the West in American culture. But I thought it was quite appropriate in thinking of how do we create more interdependent futures with our living worlds, especially in places that still continue perpetrating and developing more and more distance between our food sources and our actual day-to-day actions. So this small publication was a project in this way of understanding how we can work at this intersection between nature and culture. And my conversations were with women working in this field. And so with a landscape architect, with a woman who started one of the first urban farms in Amsterdam, with somebody that measured the food flows of Amsterdam from suppliers and producers, as well as a woman who created probably one of the best maps I've ever received as a gift, and it imagines Amsterdam as a national park city. And through these conversations, I intentionally diffracted, so the way light hits something, instead of reflecting back at you, it splits and goes in different directions. To really evoke this non-linearity of thinking and working together, because the climate crisis is something that implicates all of us and affects all of us. So the last person that I spoke to in this small publication was a really amazing curator, Alice Smits, who does curating as research and really looks at how we deal with the climate crisis. And specifically in the Netherlands, it's something that isn't on the, the cultural agenda yet. So in order to solve that, we, in 2019, while all of this was happening, we were commenting climate justice. In Utrecht, part of Casco Art Institute working for the Commons, we started working on this code of ethics for artists and art institutions to follow. Needless to say, it's been a year of working together, and we're starting to understand that a collective working process when it comes to climate requires a lot of hands and a lot of thinking, and also a lot of patience. So 2020 was a busy year, even though most of our year looked like this. The document now is still not public nor finished, which is important for the process. However, we have managed to be informed both by empathy and the necessary places to nurture relationships. We're also aware that climate justice is so context specific, and therefore it's not a code that works everywhere in the world. We actually are trying to figure out a way to common all the diversity of climate justice codes for arts and institutions that are emerging in places like San Francisco, in places like New York, in the Netherlands, also here in Poland, and really building a network of support and allyship for this. Right now, it was my original intention to work with this code here in Warsaw and really look at what is the climate context here. And so my research and my project that I'm curious to develop over the next coming months is really looking at what implicates our relationship to the environment, and how can I create these collective assemblies with those already working on it and build stronger relationships so that we don't feel so alone. And the format of an assembly, a temporary gathering of people with common interest, so that we can share and rehearse this, build these relationships and create stories so that this culture becomes the more dominant narrative towards our environment, is the intention of this multi-year research practice and project. And it is my hope that we can all build stronger environmental identities so that we can really identify and recognize our own positions within the living ecosystems. That's it. Any questions?
Hi, Amy. So I'm Dan Hastings. I'm the culture attaché at the embassy. This is my colleague Dominika Świetanska. She's my colleague in the cultural department. So are you Polish American? Oh, okay. Well, first I'd like to thank Netherlands for supporting your artistic development. Thank you.
You're doing great.
Please continue. You know, it's just fascinating just thinking of Fleur and Nadia and you. It seems like there's some natural synergies, actually. And was that the thinking of selecting them, that they could maybe influence each other? Because I think there's some natural areas for collaboration.
We used to tailor those kind of connections, but now this was a very good coincidence.
Yeah.
And also sharing interests among our curatorial team. So,
Yeah.
it's natural because we are taking decisions who is coming, whom we are inviting here for the residency. And this is like...
Okay, so we are basically, this combination represents our team's curatorial choices and interests. So semi-random and semi-tailored because of those interests.
Well, that's great. You know, I just want to sort of compliment all three of you because, you know, your work is really important, showing sort of humanity's impact on nature, and that, and also humanity's impact on our urban lives. But that I hear, unless I'm mistaken, that there is hope. And you're sort of you're awakening people to that, you know, this is a problem, and there's hope to address it, but we need to start doing it now. So I just think it's great, all three of you, what you're doing, and this was really helpful for me to see today. So wish you all the best.
Thank you. I like questions, so if anyone else has another question. Yes?
Hi, Amy. I'm Anna. I'm working here at the Social Projects Department. I'm just curious about your kind of starting point for your research and on this, let's say, institutional things related to ecologies, like code of practice, like just how do you think about it? Is it like strengthening the existing like environmental consciousness within artistic community, or you think it's a kind of a vehicle to communicate with other communities? Like, I'm curious how you think about the interrelation between the artistic assemblies and other assemblies within this context in which you work.
So I think the best way to explain this is to clarify the two strands of this thinking in terms of sustainability and assembling. So assembling ecologies is kind of my field work and my personal in the city, in civic space research and understanding through methods of storytelling and being together and working on community engaged practice. And then the other strand of this is the institutional practice, in which an equal amount of labor that has to be done within an internal institution. And so it's almost the artist then acts like a consultant, and the institution becomes a test site to try out ways in which we can work towards a climate just institutional operations method. And so at the moment, the CJC for me, which is the Climate Justice Code, is activated both in directions of institutional consultancy, but also then working in civic and private spaces through more human-to-human contact. And this test site, institution as a test site, is something that we're working towards and understanding, and we will be testing out in the coming months in the Netherlands, and then once we can kind of report that, we'll make it more public, but no one should know that. Oops. Yeah.
What is Casco? What is Casco?
Casco is the reason I ran away from the United States. No, Casco Art Institute Working for the Commons is an art institution based in Utrecht, and they are constantly a process-oriented institution that began with, they've been around for now 29 years, I think, or 30 years, and they began at the heart of reproductive labor rights and maintenance work, and really looking at ways in which now their identity is the commons, and commons essentially is managing and sharing resources, and how does the commons within our cultural field look like, and even during a pandemic. And so they are part of an ecology and also have their own ecology of artists and practitioners within their site. And they also have exhibitions, and I think right now they're working on a artist in residency for the space, since it's been difficult to have exhibitions open there. I think the work that they do, and those of us who are involved with the various projects and lines of study and inquiry has been really inspirational to thinking through our futures and also the urgencies of today.
You said that you grew up in Brooklyn, in the Polish neighborhood. So are your Polish roots helpful being here, or more disturbing, since you have to face, I don't know, your expectations and challenges as a...
Well, I actually don't know anyone in Warsaw, so well, I think I have one friend that's in the area, so I think it's helpful, but it's also, I think it helps to create more human connections. Definitely, of which hopefully that research will manifest in. It feels sometimes a little more authentic and less contrived than in other places that I've done field work.
Thank you so much, Emmy, and thank you everybody that you join us. We are trying to organize such presentations every time we receive new residents. It's really great that we can be here together despite the circumstances that are not the most welcoming. And here we have, for those who didn't receive so far some of our materials, so beautiful diaries that are actually representing memories of our residencies from the last year, in a way, and a set of Ujazdowski, the Residence magazine, which is a very special project, curated by Marianna Dobkowska and Witek Orski, photographer, which consists of interviews with our residents. So there are all the issues that we published so far, and there are very, very interesting documentation, interviews of the past residencies. So thank you again. And
can I just ask you a question? So did the center just reopen because the restrictions were lifted last week or 2 weeks ago? Have you been open for a while?
No, we are open, of course.
For exhibits? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I thought museums were closed.
And we are closed. We've been open since 2nd of February when it comes to the exhibition places. So you can.
That's good.
Yes, so you can visit our venues.
That's great. Are there special restrictions, like how many people?
There are restrictions when it comes to the number of visitors, but I presume nothing else. So we can go through or Marysia can give you in details because Marysia is from the promotion department. But you can get we can get the tickets for you if anybody of you would like to have a look of our present shows at the main hall, and then you have the free entrance to the galleries. You can be our guests today.
Thank you.
If you would like to do it, right?
Yeah, today probably not, but it's great to know that you're reopening and other museums are reopening too. So it's good to have all the museum workers back working again and connecting with people as all the artists are working on. So thank you all. Good luck. It's great what you're doing.